Today's presentation definitely, I encourage if you have a journal or a piece of paper and a pen, or if you prefer to type it out, a lot of questions and kind of journal prompts I'll be giving you during this presentation. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so I'm Dr. Stephanie Bull, and I'm a therapist at CU Denver's Counseling Center. I am the group outreach and prevention therapist on staff, new to this role, and just a few things for you to know about our services that I wanted to share. You as a student pay student fees, and the student fees go towards therapy sessions. Some of them do. So you're allotted 10 sessions per year through our center, and groups, workshops, and crisis appointments, those kind of things do not count towards your session limit. So you can definitely go to our website and look. We have weekly workshops. They're typically on Wednesdays around 5. And next month's series on Wednesdays from 5 to 6 have different topics. You can pre-register for those by emailing me at stephanie.bullen@ucdenver.com. All the information again is up on the website, so you can see a little bit of an outline on what's covered in those workshops. Completing here in the month of September, we've been doing these sessions from 5 to 5:30 that are really brief, called Reflect and Connect, during which there are some journaling activities and information on different self-care topics, and then people are open to share and participate in the last 5 to 10 minutes of those. Today's topic that felt like compelling, to me at least, and relevant during our times during the pandemic, as well as being a student, is all about balance. And I think that this topic of balance is thrown around a lot. Like, well, what do you need for balance or grounding or self-care? But I kind of like to debunk this term, so you can think more about for yourself what balance might look like for you today versus tomorrow versus next month, and how that might change with time and where you are in your life and your goals. And this is themed for Reflect and Connect, but the same ground rules apply. Just being respectful and kind and nice to one another. No call-outs or accusing others of wrong opinions as we go through this material. And the more you're open to this information, the more you may benefit as you kind of introspect into your own life. Okay. The first thing I invite you to do is to write about a time in your life when something felt like it was in balance. So just about a minute here, and typically I ask kind of for feedback after that, but I totally understand if you want to share or not share. As you're writing about a time when something felt like it was in balance, you may notice kind of what domain of your life that was in. Maybe physical health, mental health, with work or your career, being a student, and what you were doing that was helping to achieve balance. Because chances are it didn't fall into balance just by itself. It required some kind of effort on your end. Okay, moving on to the next prompt. Right off the top of your head, if you could just jot down what feels balanced in your life currently and what does not feel balanced. And this is really just to trust your gut with what's coming up. What feels like it's in balance, what does not. Totally fine if everything does not feel in balance. Okay, so now looking at the items you wrote down for what is balanced, and you might notice if these topics are related to your values or goals or directions in your life that are most important to you right now. Or alternatively, you may notice that what feels off balance may be the very things that you care a lot about as well. And maybe you are more particular or perfectionistic or just have higher standards in those areas of your life that you value the most. So maybe you have like a fine-tuned telescope image of those things in your life so that anything that feels off feels magnified. Just to notice that typically, again, the things we care about the most, we're looking at more closely and are more picky and judgmental about ourselves when it comes to those topics. And if there are things that do not feel balanced, you may look and prioritize that list of things as to what you may wanting to work on, or maybe something feels off balance that you may need to prioritize it, but you don't want to, but it would be good for you. Like physical health and going to a routine dentist appointment. It's not something I enjoy, but sometimes something that we prioritize, even if we're not in the mood to. And I also add this question of maybe it's something that you need to accept as okay right now in your life that's not feeling in balance. For example, being in the pandemic, definitely been less social, even though that's something that makes me feel more balanced. And just accepting that, large gatherings are probably not safe and that's okay, that I will not prioritize right now. And to be more understanding of yourself for why these things are off balanced. Or maybe you like traveling, things like that. So really just kind of inviting you in these beginning questions to take a little bit of what's called like a life inventory of what's going on, what feels right, what doesn't feel right, and to trust your gut with what's naturally coming up right now. Okay, so moving into more of what I call like a teaching component of the material I have for you, discuss more of really a philosophy that guides this one form of therapy that I'm trained in called Dialectical behavioral therapy. It's a really well-known, empirically supported treatment, and they've used a lot. Marshall Linehan, the creator of this therapy, has utilized a lot of philosophical viewpoints to come into greater understanding of yourself in relationship to your environment and others around you. So dialectics is the study of opposites, and there's 4 tenets that I'll go over. The universe is filled with opposing sides and opposing forces. And there is always more than one way to see a situation and more than one way to solve a problem. So dialectics embraces that two things that seem like opposites can both be true. Some examples I use that naturally occur in our environment: the sun, the moon, night, day. Both of these are true, and one is not more right than the other. They're just naturally occurring and actually needed, these opposite forces, for survival. Even just think about if you had the same opinion as everyone around you, that would not be helpful, if we all saw things similarly to solving problems in our world. Some common dialectics, and again, we'll go over this in future slides, more specifics, are things like acceptance and change. We are all working on accepting things about ourselves while working to change maybe even the same things that we're accepting. You may hear this a lot in, like, when someone's trying to lose weight, that they're accepting of their body and where it is currently in the moment, and also working to change it at the same time. That one's really sometimes hard to wrap our heads around. Work and play is another dialectic opposite. Restoration and activity. And accountability and support in our relationships. And we were just talking about this the other day in a staff meeting, about how much during these times, just with social justice issues in themselves, how to hold each other accountable. But at the same light, we also need to be supporting one another. It's almost like by supporting and creating healthy relationships and good dynamics that you feel that you have the space and comfort level to hold someone else accountable or responsible for their actions. Another tenet is that change is the only constant, and that meaning and truth will evolve over time. And you just think about this for yourself, where you are and how old you are and where you're living and what you're doing and who your friends are and your beliefs about the world and how much that changes even within a year's time. Definitely 5 years ago, you probably saw things differently or prioritized different things, and that's okay. And that's part of our evolution as individuals. In the same light of that, each moment is new. Reality itself is always changing. Definitely, we apply the pandemic to this. Couldn't have expected this, and maybe our truths now and how we organize ourselves and our lives are different as reality itself is different. Change is also transactional, and then what we do influences our environment and other people in it, and then our environment and other people are influencing us. And this really is maybe why the teeter-totter imbalance is always an ebb and flow experience, and that maybe, I just think about this with my partner, it's impossible to be a giver in a relationship all the time, and that you may be alternating who is giving in different ways in a relationship at different times. So as maybe someone's work schedule changes and they're no longer available to cook dinner, that's the case with my partner, I picked up more slack and have been doing more of that. And it won't always be this way. Change will be transactional as our environments and different things influence us. So that's helpful to keep in mind with balance for yourself and how your environment, people in your environment might be changing how you find balance. I'm going to go through just important opposites to balance, and for these I'll spend enough time on each slide for you to think about where you may be on this spectrum. It's definitely not either or, it's not work or rest. And if we find ourselves too far out on one end of a continuum, like resting too much, that wouldn't be effective or adaptive. It's likely that we're switching back and forth. For some people, it's more effective that they feel balanced when they're working really hard and maybe they have 2 10-hour days of work and schoolwork, and then they like 2 days off. So for you to be thinking about these in dynamic ways and what makes you feel more balanced. For me, even though I work for 10-hour days, I actually prefer to spread it out. So some days I'll do extra reading or something on the weekends rather than cramming it during the week. Just thinking about yourself and what makes you feel most balanced. So as you're potentially journaling about these topics and thinking about what works for you and what doesn't work for you as well in this moment today, noticing, again, how these things change with time and how it might be important. Maybe you're working on things that you'd like to do to improve yourself, and you have a list of those things that you're working on. But if we hyper-focus just on the things like that we want to improve ourselves, and we just focused on what we need to do and neglected the things we want to do, or congratulating ourselves on accepting something about ourselves, how that would really alter our reality, that we may become too obsessional and fixated on something and not enjoying our lives and finding contentment. For example, I've definitely been working on during this time finding contentment with what is, rather than always working to change or, obtain more. Thinking about financials and saving money, for example, being content with what I have, clothing-wise, food-wise, without always seeking for more. Definitely have more slides for these opposites to balance. And the second one listed here, emotion regulation and emotional acceptance. By regulation, I really just mean working to change your emotions, and acceptance more of living in them. And both are important, right? Sadness, anger, frustration, they all have a place. Yet if we didn't regulate them, like say you were sad for 3 or 4 days in a row, that probably might not feel good, and it might be impacting other areas of your life. So you may then want to change that emotion. Yet sometimes it's really important that we live in our emotions and just kind of ride the wave and see them through and accept where we are, or else it keeps coming up, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to not think about something, and it's almost like trying to hold a beach ball under the water, that effort, energy it takes to suppress or not thinking about something, then once you stop using that energy and effort to hold that ball underwater, it just pops up. So definitely think about that for yourself as well, of how much you might need to live in your feelings a little bit. Some of these concepts are also culturally loaded. I definitely want to take a moment to acknowledge that different cultures see independence, for example, and asking for help differently, as well as how open or private you are as a person. So just think about the influences in your life or your history that may have guided you to where you are today. And maybe that's working out for you, and maybe it's not. So sometimes we have to push ourselves to act opposite of what, if we're always, for example, trying to master things on our own and not asking for help, then maybe the skill you need to practice is to do a little bit of the opposite. Okay. Here's another list. I have a lot of these. Trust and suspicion. So both play a role, both are important. think a lot about this with our current times again, and how much it might be helpful to trust that things will be okay and to let things naturally unfold, versus the sense of like maybe the opposite too of trust could be power and control and wanting to control a situation. And for some people, rather than just trusting that things will be okay, they'd rather have power and control in ways that they could feel powerful and more in control is by maybe consuming media and understanding where we stand with certain topics, or protesting, or writing letters to government officials, or another way you could feel like you have more control of a situation, like with the pandemic, is by wearing a mask or controlling your environment, things like that. So noticing that for yourself. Watching and observing and participating is another one. And by this, I really think of it more of like when maybe like more like an introvert of standing back and watching situations and be more of the observer in the room, versus participating and sharing your experiences and speaking up, or providing feedback to others. And again, if you're typically the one that observes, maybe a challenge to yourself would be to participate more. Taking from others and giving. Focusing on yourself and focusing on others. There's definitely always a time and a place in our lives where maybe we would like to be able to focus and give more to others, yet our energy and effort to do that is not there, and that maybe you just really need to focus on yourself. I definitely think of college as one of those times where you're short on resources, emotionally, energetically, time, money, all the different types of resources we possess, and that focusing on yourself might be necessary in order to get at the other end of the tunnel of, you know, having a job where you are afforded more luxuries like time and energy. Nurture and challenge. And again, the last one, focusing on your capability and focusing on your limitations. Maybe today you just learn you need to challenge yourself to focus more on your capabilities rather than hyper-focusing on your limitations, to be nice to yourself and more compassionate. Okay. I just kind of wrote down here, since I'm also a yoga teacher, how dialectics is an example of how they fall into almost every, you know, occupation or setting, and you can adjust them to fit your lifestyle, and how you might become more aware of these opposites. Definitely see them in my everyday life even now. Like I'm consuming tea right now, and I also need to consume water and hydrate. And they're not always opposites, they're both and. So strength and flexibility when it comes to working out for me, applying the dialectics and thinking about how I can do both. And every day is not challenging, or I don't exercise every day, having days of ease and time off. So I challenge you to find ways that dialectics or opposites are present in your life, and when you might need to lean into the other side to find more restoration and benefit.